Hi, welcome back. This is the fourth week of our class. What I'm going to do is in the beginning of every class, I'm going to follow the same strategy. I'm going to talk a little bit about what happened last week, and I'm going to emphasize things we did and then move on to this week, telling you what the bridge is between the two, always keeping the why of things in mind. So the recap of week 3, and I just want to make some notes live as we go along. So the recap of week 3 was in weeks 1 and 2, we did what we call time value of money. And this I call as the bread and butter of finance. But remember, we had no risk yet. That's the only thing I'll keep pushing because I want you to recognize that we'll do a lot of stuff on risk. And because it's something added on later, I don't want you to, on the one hand, ignore it completely, but on the other hand, be clear that we are not going to do it while we are doing time value of money because the two together becomes too complex. The third week, recap, we started talking about decisions and how to make them. So the third week, criteria. We talked about decision criteria, and we basically spent a ton of time introducing criteria, doing examples, introducing another one, doing examples, and so on. So the two criteria we spent a lot of time on first was NPV. And remember, NPV requires two things, cash flows and discount rate, or the interest rate. We spent a lot of time on that, and for reasons that were hopefully obvious. Then we spent time on payback, and this we were raised some questions about. Its probably main advantage is ease of calculation, ease of communication, but it really has some issues. And the main issue is that it's myopic. Payback is interested in how soon you get your money back rather than what is the value of a project. As a result, the measurement is in terms of periods, and that really doesn't help very much. The third one, on which we spent a fair amount of time, but we largely spent time calculations, is IRR. And as it says, this is what I love about finances, if it says internal rate of return, there's a reason for every word. So internal is the most critical one here, i.e., you are trying to figure out the rate of return on your specific project. So the only thing that this guy needs to calculation is cash flows. Similarly, the only thing this needs is cash flows, unless of course you're doing discounted payback, but that's just a minor change in my view to payback. Payback's deeper issues are what I had mentioned earlier. Now IRR, internal rate of return. Internal because remember, cash flows belong to your project. When I say belong, I mean in a strong way. It's a strong word. Obviously, cash flows are dependent on whether the customer or whoever you want to sell your product to or service to is willing to buy it or not. So it depends on a marketplace. But what I mean by it belongs to you is that it's the signature, if you may, of your project. So cash flows are the only thing used to calculate it. And basically, it's internal, meaning it looks inside. It's concerned only about the project. The rate of return it's a percentage. So this is a number and this is dollars. And those are major issues. Unit of measurement is not just what the unit is. It could be cows instead of dollars. But what it shows you is that what are the strengths and weaknesses. And by the way, this percentage is a huge problem when you're making decisions based on percentages, and we'll talk about that. So last time we talked about how to calculate IRR, and we'll do it again this time. But basically what IRR is the rate of return you earn on your project. So it turns out if you use your rate of return to evaluate your project, then what happens is your NPV is 0. And that characteristic of IRR is used to actually calculate it. And what you end up saying is, if IRR is greater than R, remember, who does little r belong to? It's a cost of capital. It is what other people in similar businesses are earning. And if your rate of return is not higher than that, then you got a problem. You shouldn't do the project. So we did this, but we also did one more thing, and that is, apart from being a percentage and in isolation not meaning anything, IRR eventually has to be compared to R, and this implies that NPV is positive. So basically, underlying even the simplest IRR decision making, IRR by itself doesn't mean anything. The benchmark is R, and what you need is IRR to be greater than R, which makes sense. But why do you need that? And we'll see graphs again. Is because that's exactly when NPV is positive. So in some sense, IRR's tragedy is that it works because behind the scenes NPV is working. We saw one issue with IRR, which was a calculation issue. Remember, we focused on calculations. And the calculation issue we saw is that if you could have multiple IRRs. I don't want to talk about this too much because this is more a mechanical thing. So for example, what we saw was, the last example we saw, that if cash flows change sign more than once, and in our example they changed sign twice, I believe they went negative, positive, negative, you could have two IRRs, but up to 2. You could have 0 or you could have 1, but up to 2. And we saw in our example there were 2 IRRs, and that kind of creates another layer of unnecessary complexity to decision-making criteria. Today what I'm going to spend some time early on is revisit IRR, and we'll talk about its weaknesses that are much greater than this weakness of getting multiple IRRs. In my view, IRR is very deceptive and seductive. It has some really cool characteristics, but it's also bad for decision making. Yet it's used more than NPV. So we'll talk about those two issues. Then the second part of today's class is, remember what's common to all these criteria. To calculate all of them, you need cash flows. And we'll spend some time on cash flows. So that is the big picture of week 4. I just reviewed quickly week 3, and we will start with week 4 right away. If you want to take a break, just think about what I've talked about. This may be a good time to do that. What I'm going to do is let you do that and continue, but this is a nice place to take a break and think about what we have covered and where are we going. Okay, see you in a moment.